And I was still a Nazi, and I said, hey, why should I go to the Americans? They're as bad as the Russians. I don't trust them. There is no way. They will be just as mean. And all we had was rumors. And so I didn't know what else to do. I had to get away from the communists. And so my girlfriend and I decided we would flee to the American military zone of West Germany. And as I have told some of the kids in school, you know, it's very hard sometimes for Americans to picture refugee life, because when you watch on television anybody fleeing, they always flee in a Mercedes. Have you noticed that? Just run, Mission Impossible. And when you really flee, you flee with your feet. You walk, and you starve. And that's what we did. We walked endless miles, hundreds of miles in the rain. Many people died. And the reason why I lived, I know today, is because there was a God, the God of my mother, who protected me. I found that out later when I found my foster mother, and she said, I prayed for you every day. And God answers prayers. And God was with me, even so I didn't believe in him anymore. And, you know, as a child, I had been so poor that I knew all the edible things in the wilderness. The roots and the mushrooms and the herbs, we lived on that. I forgot how food tasted after a few weeks. We just moved toward the west, and then we finally came to a village and found out that we couldn't move on because behind the village was no man's land. And I didn't know what a no man's land was. Nobody had told me. And they said it's a stripe of land several kilometers wide that you're not allowed to cross because the Russians patrol it. And I said, why can't we cross it? They said the American military zone is behind it. And I said, that's where I want to go. They said, don't we all? The refugees said. And I said, why don't we go? They said, we told you they shoot you, they patrol, they kill you. And I said, well, they're not going to stop me. And the following night, I had found somebody. We had given him all our valuable things, and that ferryman down at the river promised us he would take us over to the American zone, and it seemed like he would. We were a whole group of people, and the entire group was led by that guy over to the American zone. I want to believe it was an accident. He led us straight into a Russian death trap. And we had the guns on us suddenly, and they were shouting and shooting. And I still remember it was just the last few hundred yards before we made it over to the American side, and suddenly the guns are on us, and I was laying behind a bush, and all I could think of was, if I die right now, why was I born? Why was I alive? And where am I going? And it suddenly hit me, I had no answers. Let me tell you, folks, I wish that you all might understand, no matter what age you are, where you are coming from or where you are going, that you better decide now where you go in case there comes a time where you wonder if you will live. And you better decide it now. And I think that it is so good here in America that you can find out. See, I couldn't. In Nazi school, they didn't teach me. There was no way that I could find an answer. And I was laying behind that bush, and I thought, I've got to find out if there are some answers. And I said to my girlfriend who was with me, I said, you know, the Russians are waiting for us to come out and surrender. And I said, we are not surrendering. Do you hear me? We are running past the guns. And so my girlfriend and I just got ready to run when we heard a child cry. And I worked my way over and found a little kid, probably 2.5 or 3 years old, a little girl. She had lost her mother and baby brother, and that whole commotion when the Russians were shooting, they didn't shoot anymore. They were listening. They knew they had us. They just waited for us to come out. And here was that kid, and I thought, oh, what do I do with that little kid? Mother and baby brother were gone. We took that kid between us, and we dragged her between us across the guns, past a river, up a hill to the American side, and we made it in absolute silence. Not one shot, not one shouting. The only thing you could hear was that gargling of that water when we fought through the river. And when we finally made it over there, you know, at such a moment, you don't stop to turn around and find out why the Russians didn't shoot. It suddenly hit me, we made it. And I have often thought about it, why we did. And I can think of several things, and perhaps one of them is that the Russians didn't have the heart to shoot at that little kid. But whatever it was, suddenly we find ourselves on the other side, dripping wet, and we have that little kid there from here on down. And I see a light in the distance, and I think, nobody will open the door, because I knew that no German farmer would help us. They didn't. But I thought, I'll try it once more, or she'll die of pneumonia. I thought, I get toward that light, and I'll just hammer on that door and put my foot in the door when they open it, and I just say, we don't want anything from you, just take that child and she'll die of pneumonia. It was so cold. And so, as I was getting to that building, I should have known that didn't look like a German farmhouse. Long, low building in the middle of the woods. I hammered on that door. The door opened unexpectedly soon. In the door frame stood not a German farmer, but an American soldier. And I want you to know I have never, ever in my life ever been so scared then and since then. That was the most scary moment in my life, because I looked at that guy, and he looked exactly the way that the Nazis said any American would look. And the Nazis had told us that the Americans as a whole were very wide and big people because they liked to eat so much. The first American soldier that I ever saw, the first American I ever saw, that soldier, filled the door frame. I looked up at him and I thought, oh, they are as big as they said. And when we finally tried to communicate, I realized we couldn't talk. I spoke German, Czech, and Russian, and he spoke English. We just could not communicate. He brought an interpreter, and that interpreter just explained to us that I should talk and what was our wish. And I just looked at that soldier and I said, tell that soldier, we didn't mean to come here. Please let us go. Don't do any harm to us. Please. And just take the child, and she will die of pneumonia. Her mother and baby brother are in the woods. Just let us go and take the child in. And the American soldier stood there, and he invited us in. And he will never know how scared I was, because I looked at him and I thought, if he invites us in, then he locks the door, and then we are at their mercy. But you see, you don't argue with a guy who has a gun on his head. So I just walked in, and I looked around, and I wondered what would happen next. And I told you I was a born and trained fighter. No Russian had ever laid hands on me. I had watched other people being murdered and hurt, but nobody had ever touched me. And I was determined that nobody was going to touch me. And I was just looking around, waiting that anybody would come near me, and I fight until they kill me. And those American soldiers just didn't seem to want to fight with me. They brought food and a cot and a blanket for the little kid. And then one guy, and the kid was falling asleep. And so I said to my girlfriend, I said, some of the soldiers had left. And I was so scared of all of them. I said to my girlfriend, I said, as soon as they don't watch closely, let's just move out. And so we edged toward that door that had that X. I couldn't read exit. I didn't know what that was, but I figured that was a place to go out. And so I edged toward that door, and here is that American soldier who says, come back. I stood there, and I looked at him, and I said, was wollen Sie? What do you want? And he looked at me, and he said, you tired, sleepy, you come, and you sleep. And he pointed at the door. And I thought, that's it. I knew it was coming. So I looked at him and I said, Nein, nope, I'm not going in there. And you know, that guy knew what I was thinking. He looked at me and he said, listen, he said, me American, you understand? Well, I understood that much. And I said, yeah, and I thought, does he think I'm stupid? I have seen his uniform in Nazi war films. Sure, I know he's an American. Then he looked at me and he said,